How did the end of colonial rule affect French culture? Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming back to our channel. We are going to go into a topic that has been the subject of considerable controversy and discussion today. And that subject is, how did the end of colonial rule affect French culture? So, let's get this show on the road. The imperial colonial power of France. The French colonial empire, often referred to as the M, and continuing on into later centuries. In basic terms, the history of the French colonial empire may be broken down into two different time periods. The first French colonial empire continued to exist until the year 1814, by which time the majority of its territory had been dispersed or sold. Year 1830 marked the beginning of the Second French colonial empire, which started with the invasion of Algeria. The Second French colonial empire was the second biggest colonial empire in the globe during its height, which occurred between the two world wars. The British Empire was the greatest colonial empire in the world at the time. The French started to build colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and India throughout the 17th century. But, as a result of their loss in the 7 Years' War, they were forced to relinquish the majority of their holdings. The North American colonies were lost to Britain and Spain, although Louisiana, also known as New France, was eventually restored to France by Spain in the year 1800. After that, in 1803, the land was transferred to the United States. After 1850, France focused its attention mostly on Africa, as well as Indochina and the South Pacific, as it rebuilt the majority of her new empire. As it expanded, the new French Empire assumed new responsibilities in commerce with the metropole, including the provision of raw resources and the acquisition of produced goods. The restoration of an imperial state brought back the prestige of France, particularly in the realm of international influence, as well as the propagation of the French language and Catholicism. Additionally, it was a source of manpower throughout both of the world wars. The civilizing mission, or mission civilisatrice, was one of the primary objectives. The most influential advocate of colonialism at the time, Jules Ferry, made the following statement in 1884. The higher races have a right over the lower races. They have a duty to civilize the inferior races. Full citizenship rights, sometimes known as assimilation, were provided, despite the fact that, in practice, assimilation was always receding and the colonial inhabitants were regarded more like subjects than citizens, with the noteworthy exception of Algeria, where the French immigrants assumed control despite being in the minority. France only sent a limited number of settlers to its various colonies around its empire. During World War II, Charles de Gaulle and the Free French gradually gained control of the overseas colonies, and used these territories as staging areas from which they planned and executed their strategy to free France. According to historian Tony Schaefer's argument, France was eager to maintain its overseas empire at the end of the Second World War in an effort to restore its world power status. After the humiliation of defeat and occupation, how did France come to possess such a vast colonial empire? In the 17th century, France embarked on a colonization effort that included North America, the Caribbean, and India. The majority of colonial expansion took place in the 19th century, beginning with the invasion of Ottoman Algiers in 1830, continuing with the so-called scramble for Africa, and culminating with the formation of protectorates in Tunisia and Morocco. In the decades leading up to the First World War, not only were the French able to contain the English on the Atlantic seaboard for over 150 years thanks to the economic and military alliances they formed with the most influential Aboriginal tribes in North America, but they were also able to ensure the survival of a sparsely populated New France, the borders of which would have been difficult to defend in the absence of such alliances. This network of alliances was deployed by the French in North America. In the Caribbean, French West Indian settlement began in 1625, with the admission of French settlers to St. Christopher, already settled by the British in 1623 and partitioned between the two countries, until its cession to the British in 1713. By 1664, France held 14 Antillean islands with a total population of 7,000 white people, with Guadeloupe and Martinique serving as its principal possessions. However, as a result of France's loss in the 7 Years' War, the country lost the majority of its lands. The North American colonies were lost to Britain and Spain. Although Louisiana, also known as New France, was eventually restored to France by Spain in the year 1800. After that, in 1803, the land was transferred to the United States. After 1850, France focused its attention mostly on Africa, as well as Indochina and the South Pacific, as it rebuilt the majority of her new empire. As it expanded, the new French Empire assumed new responsibilities in commerce with the metropole, including the provision of raw resources and the acquisition of produced goods. The restoration of an imperial state brought back the prestige of France, particularly in the realm of international influence, as well as the propagation of the French language and Catholicism. Additionally, it was a source of manpower throughout both of the world wars. Was the process of independence for any of the French colonies a peaceful one? There was a peaceful transition of power in the independence of various French colonies. After the conclusion of World War II, all of France's colonies made efforts to achieve their independence. In contrast to areas like Algeria and Vietnam, where the end of French authority was marked by bloody uprisings, the transfer of power in West Africa was relatively bloodless. The Loi Cadre of 1956, which rebuilt French West Africa, reduced the authority of the federal government and concentrated greater power in the hands of the various colonial governments. The Constitution of Charles de Gaulle's Fifth Republic, which was adopted in 1958, provided the colonies with a significantly increased level of autonomy. The majority of the French colonies in sub-Saharan Africa achieved their independence the same year, in 1960. Between the 1st of January and the 31st of December in 1960, about 17 nations, including 14 that were formerly ruled by France, attained their independence. This was a consequence of the nations that had been colonizing other areas being forced by the United States to relinquish control of their colonies. In 1944, General de Gaulle made the suggestion that it was time for France to embark on the road of a new era in Brazzaville. After those 2 years, the French colonial empire was succeeded by the French Union, which in turn evolved into the French Community the following year in 1958. How did the end of French colonial rule affect the culture and economics of France? Both France's culture and economy were significantly altered as a result of the decolonization process. The process of decolonization led to a massive inflow of immigrants from France's former colonies, which had a dramatic effect on French culture. This immigration was a direct result of the decolonization process. This resulted in a heterogeneous community that included people of many different faiths, dialects, and customs. Both the cultural exchange that takes place via la francophonie and the contributions made by French nationals now residing in Africa have been essential components in the maintenance of connections that are both current and all-encompassing. Impact on the economy. In terms of the economy, the end of colonial control meant that France needed to adapt to the loss of access to low-cost raw resources and markets that it enjoyed during the time that it was a colonial power. However, the effect has been amplified further by economic variables, such as the Central African CFA franc and natural resources. Former great powers, like as France, were left in a weaker economic state and an unstable political state as a result of the war. Their resources were being strained to the limit, and it was becoming more impossible for them to retain control over remote territories. It is essential to keep in mind that the effects of decolonization are intricate and multidimensional. These effects include not just shifts in economic and cultural norms, but also modifications in political and social structures. Thank you for watching, and please remember to give the video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends, and subscribe to get more interesting information. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.